ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕਾ ਖਾਲਸਾ, ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕੀ ਫਤਿਹ. Thank you once again for joining us today for day 5 of Sidh Gosti. We are excited to wrap up our 5-day session today with a session that's going to take a look at kind of pulling everything together. The title of today's session is Model Dialogue and Connection. So without further ado, I will turn this over to our presentation team today. They will walk us through the hukum and straight into our presentation. So if I could ask our presenters to come on board and we'll get started.
Okay, well, Waiguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waiguru Ji Ki Fateh. We're absolutely delighted to be with everyone this week. You made it. You made it to day 5 of Sidh. You thought this was tough. Ask Abinash and Diveesh, who have not just survived but thrived across multiple physical Sidhics, which are to the max. They're full everything. There are so much learning, so much experience, so much emotion, so much eating. But the one thing they don't have is sleep or rest. They're absolutely just an intense 2 weeks. And I think this week you've had glimpses of that intensity, glimpses of those aha moments and that connection. But I just hope that we, as like everyone, can get back to the physical world and get back to connecting again. And so the magic of Sidh, which comes from Sangat in the presence of others, virtual Sangat is great, but can be there. And one of the amazing things about Sidh in person is how we just dive into Barney time and time again and start connecting dots. Sidh generally doesn't have a theme, but when you start going through the hukum every day and every night over the 2 weeks, these just themes start emerging, and you have these just moments of connection with Barney and Shabad that make that none of us we all crave. But Sikhi and Sidh creates this place for that environment, for that to happen. So I had a little bit of a glimpse of that this morning when I was able to dive into this hukum. And, you know, many of you, we get our hukum on our phones, we're going to reflect through it, look for that outline. And when there isn't one, we kind of try to take the gist out of it. And we move on with our day and try to implement it. But nothing like having to teach it or reflect on it formally that takes you into it. So today's hukum is on 688 of Guru Granth Sahib, and it comes in Rag Tanasri, and it comes from Guru Nanak. And I promise that even though I'm the executive director of Sikhi and I have to be very formal at times, I'm also, those of you who know me, a bit irreverent and silly. So my kids asked me today, what are you going to do that's silly? And I said, well, how about some unicorns? And so we're going to have some unicorns in here and maybe a Harry Potter reference as well on the hukum. So with that, the hukum is quite long. There's 5 stanzas or 5 buds to it. I'm going to go deep on the first one, spend a couple minutes reflecting on it, and then some questions about the rest of it. So you can, of course, open it up on your phones and go there, but what you'll notice is the themes that are eternal to Guru will come up again and again, and we'll reflect on those. And the beautiful thing, it's like the onion. Every time you hear the word Nam, Shab, the Guru, you just go one level deeper each time. So the opening line, next slide, is actually is the answer to a question, which is, how can I live in ultimate happiness? So Anand is, you know, you can describe it in many ways, Anand, but this is the Onkarendra, the Das is the ultimate Anand, a capital A Anand, the ultimate happiness. And how can I live in this ultimate happiness? And while that happiness is probably beyond a rainbow unicorn, at least a rainbow unicorn will help us chuckle and think about that this is beyond the you see a child's glee when they see this, something like this. But how do we enter that state of bliss, satisfaction, what we want to call, whatever you want to call it, but how do you live like that? How do you live in this, the ability to rise above day-to-day pleasures and impulses and say, yes, I can enjoy that piece of chocolate cake or ice cream as we seem to do every day of summer, or I can get the pride or the energy or what I get when my name is up in lights, or when people are complimenting me, or when I've achieved something monetarily or my status. That's the day-to-day Anand that drives most of us. But Guru Sahib is saying, comes and goes. This ultimate Anand that we keep talking about. How do I get there? How do I achieve that? Where does that come from? And the very first line of this shab talks about it. Next line, and it says, next slide, sorry, yeah, is that Jiva tere nai man anand hai jiva. So there's lots of things here. There's a jiva tere nai. When I live in nai here is reference to nam, and nam we spent much time on this week. And understanding nam is a lifelong journey. I think it's one of those things where I'm watching the Food Network, reading lots of cookbooks on food, and trying to tiptoe around the kitchen, and maybe once in a while making things. But I'm talking about food as I'm talking about nam, and trying to experience nam is something we talk about, we describe, we're fixated on, and hopefully in our lives we get to experience. Because if I can experience this nam, I can live in this nam, then this anand can come into my life. And anand is not external. This anand is going to come in my mind, is going to be internal, is going to be in my mind, and it's going to reside within me. And that's where that source of happiness is going to come from. So I can keep looking outside for this. But when this happiness, this ananda comes into my life through this connection to nam, it's going to happen inside me. Great. What is this nam? How do we reference this? And so the next line talks about nam. And so nam here is, next slide, is nam, and you can read the line, Sacho Sacha Nao Gun Govind Hajio. So this now is timeless, it's true, Sada Ranwala is that thing, that essence that is beyond time and space, that is the eternal truth, is the attributes of the Govind, of the one that is universal, that is in all spaces. Yesterday I'm in Calgary right now, and we got to go to a dinosaur museum of all places. And dinosaur museum, it was just, I went with my mom, and my mom was trying to, how old are these things? And I'm like, well, these bones are about 75 million years ago. And it's easier for they say that, but none of us can fathom that. None of us can fathom that the world is, the universe is 14 billion years old. But then all of a sudden, when I start connecting that back to nam has to be that thing. Nam has to be that attribute, those things that were there at the Big Bang. That part of Vaheguru that was there at the beginning, that is with me now. So this is far beyond anything that is of the day, of the fashion, of the moment. It is in the moment, but this is something so much bigger and universal than that. Okay, that's easy to say, and we've spent a lot of time on nam. I still say, well, that's okay. That tells me how amazing nam is, but what now? What do I do? What do I do with this? What can I do with this nam, and how do I connect with it? I'm just this dude sitting in Calgary right now on a mattress in a house. How am I going to connect with his nam? Where is this going to happen? And that's where the next line comes. Next page. This is where the guru comes in. Is that the guru is the boat for us, is the vehicle, is the coach. All the references we use to guru, which is that shabd that gives us that sense of gyan, that wisdom of something beyond what we can learn in school, what we can learn out of a book, what I can learn from a TED talk or video. This gyan is something that is actually going to take me to some realm or some sense of consciousness where I can start appreciating and connecting with this apar, this sirjanhara, jinane sab kuch sirja par sab kuch ten goi, that can create universes and planets and stars and mere mortals like me and my family, and the beauty and the nature I can see in the world, that I'm never going to appreciate all of that. How am I ever going to understand 14 billion years of the history that we know of this universe and everything that's going to come and stuff? But I can't get any of that. But I can try to connect with the essence of that through nam. But how am I even going to get there? And that's where the guru is. The guru is our connection. And by connecting with the guru, for me, that makes it real. That gives me something to hold on to, something to try to work towards, something I can live with, something I can be a part of. And that's the guru for me. Out of that, the next line, because the guru is the one that takes me back to the one. The one is the one, pravana aya hukum pataya fairna sake koi. The pravan, the one is the one that through the one's hukum, Vaheguru's hukum, Ekunkar's hukum, is the one that issues the call that everything that has been created needs to come back. That's the one that the guru is connecting with, the one that never always issues the call, but for whom the this call of death never comes. And this Vaheguru that ape kar vekhe, ser lekhe, ape sut bajai. Ape kar, what do I want to connect with? not the things that have been done, not the things that have been created. Of course, I want to be in the world and the universe and all of humanity and nature. I want to connect to the thing that is behind it all. And the one that is watching everything. And the one, the one that's put this inside us, that gives us this sentience, that that we can actually start appreciating and awareness. Not that we'll ever get it, not that we'll be fully aware, but through this connection to Nam and through the Guru, that we can start appreciating something much bigger than our day-to-day existence. So this is the one, still beyond my comprehension, but through the Guru might start getting some semblance of this. Next slide. So Nanak says that this is where it becomes real. This is where Nanak comes into my life. This is where Nanak becomes my boat, my asara, is that Nanak says, Sahib agam agochar, that my master, my sovereign is I am not going to be able to access it directly. It's unfathomable. It's beyond me, but Jiva Sachi, I can live with it. I can find this Anand through this connection to Nam. So while the one, Ekonkar, is far beyond my comprehension, I can still live it like the fish in the ocean. So the fish never has to appreciate the full ocean to enjoy everything that comes from being in the ocean. So my Nam is my ability to breathe in this ocean, my ability to appreciate, just like, but a fish will never know it's in the water. But through the Guru, I can actually start appreciating that I am part of Ekonkar. I am a part of this. I am through my Shabd, through Nam. And that's what Guru gives to me. So this is hugely inspiring. Again, the Sikh worldview in a Shabd. Guru Nanak's thesis in one pad of one Shabd of just the Hukum today. So some beautiful lines, there's some connection for us. So a few questions for the chat box. So, I like having, so a little bit of dialogue. So in the couple minutes we have left. So here's a few questions for you. Next slide. And these come from the Hukum. So there's this sense that there's a line, two lines here that I was kind of thinking about this morning. So ek Sahib doe ra vaad vandaya jio doe ra chalai hukum sabai janamua sisa. So these are two different lines from the second part, is that ek Sahib, there's one sovereign, but there's two paths. And there's all this conflict coming from those paths. But both are yours, and that everything is coming from you. So what would these two paths be? So in the chat box there, reflect. What are these two paths? And then there's conflict between these two paths. Because I've read different interpretations. And so I want to ask you, what are these two different paths that Guru Nanak is describing? They all come from Vaheguru, but what are these two different ways that we can pick from? Needy and Piri, perhaps, yeah. Sharda and Shanka, yeah. Reverence versus suspicion, I guess. Good. So there's two different pathways. I'll leave it to you to think about what these two pathways may be. But here's the irony. Well, not the irony, but at the end of it, it all comes from Vaheguru. You're a Manmukh, you're a Gurmukh. You come from Vaheguru. What we consider good and bad is all Ekonkar. If you want to consider different traditions, we've talked about. So, and it's all stuff that's all part of Vaheguru and all part of a world that is coming and going. Is being born, being dying at every point in time. Great. Next question. This is fun. So this is talking about I think the third sentence talks about Bhagat, the devotee, and what happens when they connect with Nam. So Bolle Amritaban, Rasan Rasaya Jio, they speak the immortal, this timeless passion comes, these virtues come to their mouth and they taste it. Rasan Rasaya, Nam Desai. Gurke Shabd Vakhane, they're speaking, they're through the Guru, they're speaking the Shabd, and this taste is coming into them. And what is happening? Paras Parsiye Paras Hoy Ja Tere Man Pare. So Paras is the Philosopher's Stone. So someone want to put in there? What is and it's not the Philosopher's Stone from Harry Potter. You don't put the Harry Potter reference in there. But typically, what is the Philosopher's Stone meant to do? Someone write that in the box. So the Philosopher's Stone, not the Sorcerer's Stone, the Philosopher's Stone has these mythical properties that it allows what? Yes, it converts lead into gold. So there's this, and it's amazing when I read about this, that this is in the East, the West, this kind of concept there. I guess we're always trying to turn lead into gold. We're always trying to turn rich quick, all those different things that come out of it. But this is amazing. And then in Barney, there actually are, I think, dozens of references to Paras. But many of the references talk about how the Guru is the paras, right? It turns the us led individuals, us mere mortals that are full of flaws and things that are lacking. It turns us into this gold, this invaluable, non-valuable into something invaluable. But this line takes it to the next level. So what does this say? Paras, parsia, parasoy. So a Bhagat who is connected to the Guru, that connects him to the Shab, to the Nam, to Ekankar, what does that turn that philosopher's stone into? Someone want to write it in? Not into gold, but into? Well, one person must get this. It turns you from Paras to Paras into Paras itself. The same thing. Thank you. This is the beauty. This is where Val Gobind Singh Ape Gurchella. This is everything about the Guru, the living Guru, the Shabd Guru turning into the Guru Granth and the Guru Panth, where we are elevated with this divine potential that we have, every one of us, the ability not just to turn from lead into gold, but to turn from lead into the philosopher's stone itself, that we can have this complete transformation. So this is not, we're not, in other faiths that there's someone else is the child of God and that our job is to connect to that. We ourselves can become like the Guru, can become Guru-like, not just Guru-like, become Vaiguru-like. So Vaiguru and how the Guru transforms every one of us, we then have the ability individually and collectively to transform others on this path. So anyway, I think that's the last one. We'll stop there. I had one more line, but I'll flip that one. So that's the value of coming on this path. That's the value of connecting, bring Guru into your life, is that we're not just here to gold. We're not just here to turn from lead to gold. We're here to turn into philosopher's stones ourselves. So it isn't just about transforming our own reality and our own mind and bringing Nam into our lives. But then when that comes, it naturally takes you a place where you're connecting others to that. Now, the T of this, is dialogue. And dialogue is the way we interact with others. So how can I interact with my children, with my family, with my world, my society? Often when I'm trying to transform them, what do we usually do? Well, let me talk down to them, or more, let me beat this into them. So most of the world, we've been trying to transform the world through force. And Guru Nanak Sahib, as we learned this week, did not use any force, did not use any coercion or persuasion. Guru Nanak showed up with the Siddhs in a language of love, of connection, of Ekonkar. And this whole week, it's been an amazing journey into, starting with Ekonkar and Nam, but then diving into the Sidh Gosti from a reflection of history, of the Barney itself, and Rath, of how the lifestyle, everything that Guru Sahib brought in articulating his worldview, but then in transforming others, and in the process, changing everything around himself and the environment around. And so today, we're going to bring this home. So this is about making Guru Nanak's experience in with a bunch of yogis in a cave 500 years ago relevant to 2021 July, wherever you're sitting in the world. Or you think you're banging your head against somebody, be it around vaccines, around masks, around whether the Olympics should be happening, not happening. Why do we even have Olympics? Why Black lives matter, Indigenous lives matter, every life matters. My children wanting to do this versus me wanting to do that. All the things that we struggle with. From the moment we finish our Simran and our Nithanim, and then go out into the world, it's about everything else in the world and how do we engage with everything in the world. And as we're trying to transform ourselves, how do we integrate into the reality around it? And how do we try to move everyone to being more oneness that comes into it? So that's the kind of conversation we're going to have today, and take inspiration from the Gurmukh, apply it to ourselves, to some real world topics. And to do that, I'm going to pass it over to Abinash Kaur and Diveesh Singh are going to be taking this on for the rest of the morning. I'll be in and out of things, but over to you, Diveesh Singh.
Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Thank you, Kulvir Singh. That was a beautiful hukam reflection. So let's just get straight to it. Next slide, please, Abinash. Yeah, so let's actually jump straight in and do a quick activity with you all. And we'll start off with a few simple questions, excuse me. You'll actually get a link in the chat to a Jamboard. And so go ahead and click that and we can begin this fun little activity. So let's just go ahead and get started. Go ahead and post your responses. You know, are you a cat person or are you a dog person? Would love to see. Okay, dogs.
Maybe you're neither.
Interesting. Okay. Right. Oh, I see a both somewhere there. Both robots. Okay.
Is that robot dogs or just robots in general? This is a one-sided conversation.
I know, right? I know. I feel like it.
Or cat person. This is real life. That cat person would be in trouble.
Okay. Hell yeah! I love the enthusiasm. Never. Ooh. This one's a little bit more.
Diveesh, I don't think I told you. I almost got kicked out of a restaurant once for asking for pineapple on my pizza.
Really?
Yeah.
Really?
It was an Italian restaurant, and I never did that. I made that mistake again. But the guy looked at me, and he was about to kick me out. So it's like a bop. In his mind, it was a bop. That was an unredeemable sin in his mind.
Yeah, no, I definitely feel like at the Italian places they'll.
Yeah, you don't do that there. Ask it at a good old American place, but not an Italian place.
Exactly.
Even it goes against a pizza mariata.
Yeah, I'd love to see like a published pizza mariata.
There you go.
Depends.
Okay, good.
Seems a little bit more polarizing, but you know.
I can see emotion starting to rise here. People getting a little hot under the collar on this one.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, let's go on.
Next one. Oh, yeah, I see another Android text box. Budget first.
Yeah.
Good answer.
Was that to take out a mortgage to buy my last iPhone?
I know. Android phone, Apple computer.
Wow. Somebody's on the fence. Absolutely. Security. Yeah. Good. Let's keep going.
That's good. Kulvir Singh, what are your thoughts?
I love them both, but I don't think anything can compare to Alupronta. So my mind, every time I hear Alupronta, my mind goes to the best Alupronta I ever had. And this is all the wrong reasons to remember Anandapur Sahib. Last time I was at Anandapur Sahib, I had the best Alupronta of my life. And so that's not really the reference one should have for that place, but that's my reference right now.
Interesting. Okay.
You're ever at the top by Anandapur Sahib. Excellent. Alu, go be few, a little bit. Wow, look at the comments on this one. This is getting, it's like asking to pick which is your favorite guru.
Yeah.
Excellent. Muli. We have a third path.
Yes. Abinash Kaur, do you have any opinions on the Alupronta versus Gurmukh?
I'm with Kulvir ji. You know, the only reason I remember Amritsar, well, one of the reasons is definitely I had the best gobi de parathe there, and I'll always remember that spot.
There you go. We'll make this one super quick. This one's on one side or the other. This one may be a both one as well.
Yes. Yeah, that's true.
Cool.
Yeah, nothing hits like the Gurdwara Ja.
That's because there's about 8 spoons of sugar in each one.
So let's actually head back.
There was a purpose to this, I think, right?
Yeah, there is actually a purpose to this. It's not just to get your opinions, although we do really enjoy hearing your opinions on things. Yeah, so you're probably wondering why we asked these questions in the first place. So the point here is that, you know, even when we sort of discuss relatively trivial topics like these and things that are not as, you know, consequential in life, people are still pretty divided, and some can even get pretty heated. You know, we saw that with the pineapple on pizza debate. So if people are arguing, you know, about trivial things like this, you know, over the internet or in person, how can we even begin to talk more about serious topics and engage in dialogue about things that, you know, truly matter and are very consequential? So Abinash, why don't you take it from here?
Yeah, so we spend such a large amount of our time, you know, having conversations, whether it's work, a phone call with a friend, or even a Zoom session with our Sangat, right? It takes up such a large part of our lives, and we've been doing it for so long that I'm sure almost all of us are pros at it. So why focus on it today? Why does it matter the way in which we show up for dialogue and have dialogue? Well, as seen by this Jamboard, right? We all have really strong opinions about our beliefs and our ideas. We believe our answer is the only answer. Like, I think pineapple on pizza is the greatest thing in the world, right? There's this underlying tone when I go into a conversation that my way is the right way. And in fact, that it's the only way. So more often than not, I go into this dialogue with the desire to dominate, to win the conversation. I want the world to know, like, pineapple on pizza, that's the way to go. But while caught up in this desire to dominate, to win, I generally have forgotten what's the main goal of this conversation, and why am I even having this dialogue with this individual in the first place? Perhaps this is actually a conversation about the harm of large-scale pineapple production or something. Yet I choose to prioritize my opinion and to escalate this situation instead of de-escalating it. And if this is the way I normally have my everyday conversations, then how do I, as an individual and as part of a collective funk, then begin to engage in dialogue on the bigger ideas that you and I might disagree on? And there's quite a large list that's up for the discussion on our table, right, for the community. If, however, I'm unable to have a conversation or because another individual acts or likes or believes in something differently, such as they don't like pineapple on pizza because of how it harms the environment, how will I be able to address these bigger issues, right? How do I show up to the conversation so that I'm actually hearing the other person and meeting them halfway? How do we navigate these tumultuous water of words so that we can stay focused on this bigger picture? And the answer for us as Sikhs begins with going to our source, right, Guru Sahib. We heard in the Hukum reflection today about that connection to Nam and how it helps us in finding these answers in our life, right? It's there that you and I can find inspiration for the answers to our questions. And usually, you know, when we're trying to find these answers, we go to outside sources, right? We go to the internet or the people around me, to social media. But Shabad is eternal, as we've been learning. Shabad's that place where we can find that direction for dialogue, right? And the Bani of Sidh Gosti illustrates why our words matter, how to ideally show up for constructive dialogue, and how we can engage in dialogue. So before we further dive into the answers to these questions, I know, like, we have been having a daily dose of Professor Kulvir Singh, so I can't miss out on that trend. So I'd like to take a moment to draw on the inspiration from Professor Kulvir Singh's writings to explore the power of our words when we have dialogue. He writes, "How good is the brother when he speaks, a stream of vitalizing honey flows out of his soul. He fertilizes many centuries with simple, sweet words. All make conditions and terms for offering me their love. The brother gives without asking even my name, as the river gives itself to bird, beast, and man." So here, the brother that Professor Kulvir Singh is referring to is the one who's inspired by Nam, right? The one who completely surrenders to the Guru. Such a being, a Gurmukh in essence, as we've been learning, their very words are a gift, a dawn to our ears, just like honey is to our taste buds. Right? The words flowing from their connection give life to us, the listener. There's no expected return, no desire to overpower you, force you to surrender, or an ounce of selfishness behind these words, right? And this is so different from the way in which we use our words on a daily basis. I might be giving a compliment, expecting one in return, or I might be posting about how much seva I've done for recognition and self-satisfaction, right? On the other hand, the Gurmukh's words are always coming out of this place of love, not of ego. Their words understand us and create in our mind this fertile, nourishing space, such that the word hate cannot even enter our language afterwards. This is the ideal that we're aiming for, right? And we can even see its influence in our Punjabi culture, in our language. When someone congratulates you, we say back to them, and to you even more congratulations, right? The positivity, the love is just so awe-inspiring. So our words when walking this path towards the Gurmukh, the ideal of the Gurmukh, are able to give and bloom within our life. And I'll pass it to Diveesh now to give us an overview for what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, thanks, Abinash Kaur. So basically a quick overview of what we'll be diving into a little bit more as we continue this discussion. So how does the Gurmukh show up for constructive dialogue? What is sort of like the headspace to be in, to sort of aspire towards, to actually engage in dialogue effectively? And how can we use the experience of the Sidh Gosti and kind of use that as like a guide for how to set ourselves up? Second, how does the Gurmukh actually engage in conversation, and how can we aspire towards that? And finally, how can we take our learnings and reflections from the week that we've had together and use that to actually change our behavior when it comes to dialogue? We've had this chance to do a deep dive into so many aspects of the Barney, but that real value gets unlocked when we personally can figure out for ourselves how we apply the ideals in our daily lives. Next slide, please. So, let's actually go into another quick activity, just get the gears turning a little bit more. And before we even talk about approaching dialogue, we can set the context a little bit. So we went into sort of the, relatively trivial topics and had that fun little banter going on. But what about some of the more controversial and heavy topics that we encounter as a society? So you'll actually see the question up top: what are some of the topics you feel that are very controversial to talk about? And you'll see 3 categories underneath. We have families, we have Bantik, and we have global. And so your job is basically to suggest controversial topics for each of the sections.
So maybe, Avinash, if you're in there, just move things underneath if people are busy. Just put them into the right topic. Awesome. Yeah, no, these are, so the whole point here is, I would say, what are those things that at Thanksgiving, when somebody brings up Thanksgiving dinners or family meals, and you're like, oh, fera, oigal fera, or, with your coworkers, things you just avoid. So some of these things, yeah. So interracial marriage is one in our families.
Kids' sexuality.
Sexuality, yeah, absolutely, in all its different ways. The gender stereotypes, patriarchy. What else? Oh, on a global level, yeah, I think we talked about some of these things before. What are the things that are just too hard to get around? And these are those things that are important, that they have to be talked about, but yet we kind of avoid those conversations, right? So you're getting the gist of these things. Yeah, lots of things in the family. Both grandparents and supporting, not spoiling the kids. Body here, yeah. These are all Bantik issues, family issues, right? What happens when somebody in the family decides not to keep observing practices or changes things, right? Somebody in the family takes Amrit, what happens? Receives Amrit, or the opposite. Mental health, I'm sure, will come up. Finances. What are some global issues? Let's get a couple more there before we move on. So these are things that with your non-Sikh friends, or maybe the reason why you're not friends with them is because these are the kinds of things where they feel differently about, that you just can't get on there. I know that it's not there, but I know this, obviously with COVID and the pandemic, it's been so divisive. We see people there, income inequality, race, absolutely, race, on those things where, here's another spin on this. These are so controversial and they get you so angry or emotional. But on the flip side, I can say for things around homosexuality, racial issues, I actually just avoided those, Palestine, Israel, because I was so afraid of offending the other person, right? You're like, Naigal Kaloka, rather than say the wrong thing and go out there. And that's not part of this either. We want to talk about dialogue, which means you're going to show up and you want to engage on these things. So excellent. No, punchline here is no shortage of tough conversations that we need to have, that we struggle to have for a whole variety of reasons there. So maybe pass and move on.
Yeah, I mean, these are all topics that you all have probably thought of at some point, and I could definitely say for a good amount of them, I would get pretty riled up while trying to engage with someone. And I guess, a lot of these discussions, depending on sort of what our mindset is, they tend to end up being somewhat unproductive. So how can we actually show up for these difficult dialogues in a way that is constructive? So Abinash Kaur, take it away.
Yeah, like if the purpose of the dialogue, right, is to help us build these ideas together, to address these issues together, and to uncover these common goals and principles, then before we actually have the dialogue, there has to be a focus on what's our mindset when we're entering that space, right? I can't show up to the dialogue with sharpened canines or my fists out, right? How do we then take inspiration from the Gurmukh on how to ideally show up for dialogue? How do I learn to be in the world without being of the world, without letting my emotions overpower me while I'm engaging in this dialogue? Furthermore, how do I liberate myself from this ego, this desire to dominate in dialogue, and instead be able to attain this deeper understanding of the other person that I'm speaking to while still staying aligned with my own truth? And these are tough questions, right? Which is why the focus is on inspiration from the ideal, as we have ascertained based on the Bani, right? The focus is not on the end result, but the process in of itself as we go to the ideal. So we're gonna jump into the Gurmukh's alignment with truth. I'm sure this line looks very familiar to everyone at this time as we've been covering it over the past week, right? When we show up for this constructive dialogue, the first thing we have to question is, what's the purpose behind this dialogue that we're about to have? Why are we showing up to this conversation in the first place, right? And many, many times when I show up for a conversation, it's because I'm in this state of wandering. I'm searching for these answers in the outer world. Let's take that example of Apple versus Android. As an owner of multiple Apple products, I'll go to those who have an Android and say, like, how's that even functioning? Like, clearly my camera quality is way better. Here, check it out. And so in my wandering, my mindset is in this winning, this dominating state, right? And before the other person even has the chance to respond, I'm reflexively forming a response to polarize, to impress, or to show off how smart I am. I'm not even putting the effort to still my ego and try to understand the other person's point of view. Instead, my wandering is controlling my thoughts and my words. And it's only then that connection to the truth with a capital T that gives me clarity in my wandering. The Guru said, right, why wander? Truth brings purity. Without the eternal Shabad, Guru's word, no one is liberated. When I'm connected to Nam, because of Shabad, through Shabad, I'm not a slave to my emotions, like that instant arrogance that seeps within because I'm an Apple owner. That connection that's forged because of Shabad is what makes me free and purifies my words and dialogue by orienting them with the truth. Think back to that description of the sweetness of the Gurmukh's words. That purification and alignment only happens when that self is merged with the truth. It allows us to put that ego aside and focus on what's the purpose of this dialogue. So even if there's a disagreement, we still think about that sense of purpose, that shared values. How we actually show up to dialogue changes because we anchor ourselves to this truth that exists within us all. So our goal becomes searching for that truth, whether it's a truth of other people's experiences or their perspective. And it can be completely different from yours, right? It can be the Apple experience or the Android experience. And that is a truth in of itself, which we can acknowledge in a respectful manner. I might, for example, have overlapping truths with other women of color or none at all, and that's okay. So that connection and process of merging with truth teaches us as we reflect on what qualities, mindset, tone, and language we should aspire to have when showing up for that ideal dialogue.
Yeah, so the next or sort of aspect of what we're going to look at sort of like what is the ideal to aspire towards is this idea of self-recognition. So the Gurmukh self-recognition comes from their connection to the divine. So as you kind of see we've highlighted here in Pauri number 3 of the Sidh Gosti Bani, In Guru-orientedness, one realizes this and recognizes the self and thus merges with the truth. So what does it mean to recognize the self? Well, so if you actually look at the original Gurbani, the phrase is apashane, that's used for recognizing the self. So we can get a little bit more context from there. But I guess in practice, I see it almost as, like a sense of grounding. One can sort of train themselves to refer back to when in a stressful or frustrating situation. For example, I'm arguing with someone about gun control, right? That's a big thing here in the United States. And in moments like those, it's really easy to let anger and ego take the wheel. Of course, I'm going in this with the idea of I'm right, they're wrong. I'm saying this, what I'm saying is the truth. And so I see this self-recognition helping in these moments in a few ways. Just recognizing that we're human, and although we may have part of the truth, recognizing that others may also have a part of their truth. And at least that makes it somewhat easier to hear the opposing point of view instead of just closing ourselves off immediately. This in practice is not easy, right? But recognizing that we aren't perfect, and we may at best we may learn something new, but at the very least solidify our understanding what we believe throughout these conversations. And also recognizing that we, and I guess more generally, people are not necessarily our emotions. I am not an angry person, I'm just feeling angry. And so we if we can introduce this separation of emotions and the self, it not only makes it easier to sort of recognize the divine in everyone, it helps us also not get too attached to our emotional states. And so this kind of self-recognition idea can be a vital tool in our kit when we want to approach dialogue a little bit more constructively. And this is just this is a starting point from which we can build. Next slide.
Thank you, Diveesh. So another aspect of how we show up for constructive dialogue is asking ourselves, what symbols are we showing up to this dialogue with? So in Party 11, we're presented with these different physical symbols of the Sidhs. We have the begging bowl, the cap, the mat, the loincloth. And these physical symbols showcase their higher quote unquote level of spirituality. Nowadays, we also show up with symbols of a different form when we're engaging with each other and let these symbols do the talking for us. I graduated with a Bachelor's of Science, so you bet I'm adding those letters to the end of my name whenever I'm having a conversation with anything science related. We add these PhD, MS, MD, JD, etc. All these suffixes behind our name to give ourselves this credibility and flash our authority when we're having dialogue. I've studied this field, for example, for XYZ years, so of course I know what I'm talking about. You have to earn those credentials to speak with me or earn these physical symbols, like the doctor wearing the white coat. Just because I'm wearing it, however, doesn't mean I've internalized those virtues of compassion and integrity that a doctor should have. So when we engage with these symbols at the forefront, it becomes a roadblock in our dialogue. Right? We're so focused on wanting to win, to be right, and to prove to others that we're right because we have that PhD or that pointier the star. But then we don't allow ourselves to listen to the new ideas of that master student or realize the talent of the Sikh whose the star isn't that pointy, right? How different are we in that moment when we pull rank then from the Sidhs in the caves? The symbols of the Sidhs are in fact rewritten as metaphors for what symbols we should really be wearing and carrying around within us. These ideals of truth, contentment, self-restraint, they're given focus by Guru Sahib, and there's a shift from our outer symbols to our internal ideals. This emphasis is placed on diving within the self and redirecting our energy to internalize these ideals that we're trying to physically embody. Right? That doctor's compassion has to be internalized within first, so that when a patient with different values is present before them, for example, a transgender person or a woman who wants to undergo abortion, then the dialogue that they have is one of compassion, not of ego, of I'm wearing a white coat, so what I say goes, right? That gets left behind. And we rise above that symbolism and focus on that connection to Nam instead. The Guru-oriented remembers Nam. Nam enters our dialogue. such as the doctor actively thinking that this is a woman who's making her own choice, who has the right to her own choice. The responses then flow from that connection to Nam. And there's no longer a superiority that I have this degree or I'm wearing this white coat. So we have to ask ourselves when we're showing up to this dialogue, am I pulling rank? Am I rising above symbolism and seeing the person before me for who they genuinely are? And now I'll pass it on to Diveesh to share, last but not least, way we can show up for constructive dialogue.
Yeah, so thanks, Abinash, for building off this idea of, breaking free from this ego, this idea of only focusing on symbolism. How can we show up for constructive dialogue in a way that we've sort of broken from these vices and sort of this freedom that we can attain through our connection with the divine? So actually in session 4, we touched on this 40 specifically and talked about terms like Sat, Raj, and Tam. The Siddhs asked Nanak how he was able to overcome these qualities. His response, by listening to Guru's instructions, I can receive the divine light. Shabad has burnt my desires and expectations. So what does that liberation look like in today's terms? So in my experience, and again, I'm not an authority in the slightest, but I find that, this idea of my arguments have been coming from a place of ego. We've touched on that quite a bit. I must win the argument. If someone disagrees with me, they're wrong. So dialogue really, it shouldn't come from that mindset. Guru Nanak didn't go into the dialogue with the Siddhs with this mindset of I'm right and they're wrong. Despite the fact that, their points of view, if you look at it on the surface level, were pretty different. They're, for the Siddhs, right, their definition of freedom and liberation, it came from this idea of disengaging and living life of a hermit. So, fast forward to today, I'm sure, I don't think a lot of us have maybe thought about wanting to live in a cave for 20 years, but what does our version of that look like? What is our disengagement and what do we sort of perceive as freedom? What sort of the Siddhs kind of perceived as their own freedom, right? And putting it into context, I've had discussions with various uncles at various parties where we were talking about homosexuality and I was trying to sort of, almost had to justify it. And at the end of it, I really felt like just, kind of leaving the discussion was easier. I was getting frustrated, not being able to sort of get through to them and not feeling like I'd won, right? And in these moments, I had this realization of, this deciding to just not engage at the time, it can feel freeing for a lot of people. But when we decide to disengage, aren't we also just retreating to our mental caves, just like the Siddhs would physically retreat to their caves? But Guru tells us we can't live in this world without engaging with others, without these relationships. We need to be in the world, not necessarily of the world. So how can we engage without falling prey to these vices like ego, desire to win? And it all comes back to Shabad. Connecting with Shabad allows us to be truly free and to go beyond these almost, I guess I would say, constructions that society gives us. It's not being focused on ego, and it helps us change the objective altogether. It's not about winning or losing. It's no longer about, this me versus you, no longer about proving how smart I am. It doesn't matter what I have at the end of my name, suffix, whatever suffix I have, it doesn't matter. We're all at the end of the day from the same divine, and my relationship with that divinity is where my mindset should come from and where my responses can stem from. So next slide, please.
Yeah, so to wrap it up, right, we ideally show up for constructive dialogue by taking this inspiration from the Gurmukh to align our actions and words with truth, right? Developing self-recognition to ground ourselves, be of the world but not in the world, and internalizing Nam to rise above these symbols that we use to flash our credentials and make authority over others, right? So at the end of the day, we're all trying to eliminate this negativity around us when we're having this dialogue so we can freely engage without having the ego come into our mind and taking that control when we're engaging in this dialogue. And so this image, right, what we think shapes who we are. It stems back to this idea of when we align ourselves, when we're connected with Nam, when we're coming from that place of truth, that's what's going to shape our words, our dialogue, and the way we show up to dialogue then.
Cool. Thanks, Abinash. So, let's take a little bit to sort of reflect on what we've been talking about so far. And so I want everyone here to just, take a few minutes, maybe a minute or two, to think of and write down one question that you have right now. Just a question that you have as we've been sort of going through even just the week or even from today's session. And once you've thought of that, please type that question out in the chat. We want to kind of see where everyone is at, where everyone's heads are. Kulvir Singh, if you have any other thoughts.
Yeah. So this is just, a point of reflection. We've thrown a lot at you, and this, the aspiration of a Gurmukh is so far beyond who I am today, because I'm the guy that can't, have a conversation around any of the simple ones without getting frustrated. So, what's a question you have or something you're pondering about yourself, about how you show up for dialogue, how you overcome things? What can we be working on individually, collectively, to actually do this in the right way, or what is the right way? So yeah, just take a minute to reflect on some of the questions you have. How to master facilitating, doing dialogue. Yeah. Master is a strong word. I just don't want to be less worse about it. How do I slow life down? Yeah, I think, how do I engage in dialogue beyond a tweet storm, or tweet raging is what they call it, right? Whatever it is, right? And we go all into, how many times does this happen where somebody just pings us on one text message, and like 13 text messages later, you realize you've been ranting at them. Right? These are very practical things that we've all maybe not admit to doing, but how do I slow things down? How do I breathe? How does that Simran? Simran is remembrance. How does that come forth? So yeah, so just some questions that people have or something to ponder. We're going to come back to this in the end. So please take a second to write.
I see someone posted how to master facilitating / doing dialogue. Yeah, that's, I wish I had like the final answer there, but none of us really have the final answer. It's sort of what we can aspire to be. And like sort of in that process of sort of looking at these ideals, we sort of, we can get closer. That's always like, the best we can do there.
And there's conflict, right? Conflict to dialogue. How do you, when you sometimes you get into realizing we're not talking anymore, we're in conflict. How do I move out of conflict into something more productive, right? Conflict literally means this. How do I move from that to something where there's a give and take and there's some learning there we could have? This is, I got a note here about how do we, where we'll talk about this is, how do we persuade people, right? When we're not, when we do think we're in the right on something, then how do we get people to come along to the other side? And maybe that's part of it. We can talk there. So agreeing to disagree. How do we do that in respectful, right? Now I can agree to disagree with my, some places that makes sense. But when my kid wants to have, a bowl of chocolate milk with a sugary cereal for breakfast, maybe that's not the time to agree to disagree. So how do I have that, right? So this is, I think there's a spectrum here on all of these things we're going to talk about. Diets. I find myself getting very emotional about my diet choices versus somebody else's, right? Like we all think we're eating healthy enough. And then you meet somebody who's eating too much. We think they're out to lunch and we think that somebody's eating not healthy enough and we have to lecture them. How do we get there, right? How do we get beyond that? So I think lots of questions here from things to ponder. And I'm glad that, how do I live in the moment? I'm glad people are seeing this as something much more practical, which is what we wanted to do today. So in light of the time and where we are, maybe let's move on.
Let's do it. Cool. So we've sort of set the stage for how the Gurmukh shows up for constructive dialogue and how we can sort of begin to take those steps. Now, how do we take it sort of to the next level in our dialogue itself. Next slide, please. These ideas of taking our connection with the divine one step further by recognizing the divine in our surroundings and everyone we interact with. This idea of guru-orientedness in order to gain clarity while engaging in dialogue, and learning from Guru Nanak's interactions with the Siddhs about how to have these honest conversations that are, instead of being divisive, they're enlightening, they're inspiring. And finally, sort of tying it all together, how do we do this from a place of love, meeting people where they're at instead of trying to just fight them all the time?
Yeah, so previously, right, we spoke about recognizing the self when showing up for conversation, but now let's take this concept one step further and focus on recognizing the self in creation, right? We very easily say, when we're preaching to the choir that yes, Sikhs believe that the presence of Ikonkar exists in us all. We treat everyone equally for that reason. But now we have to take a step back and ask ourselves, does this actually show up in our thoughts, in our actions, in our words and dialogue? Are we compassionate for all? How many of us have maybe even heard our own friends or family members say that their kids can't get married with a person from another caste or to a darker skinned person, right? How many of us have heard in our own community spaces or in workspaces, hear members speak negatively of women or non-gender conforming individuals? Moreover, so many times, I've stood by as a bystander and simply listened to these words, right? Because I didn't want to engage in that conflict, to not engage in that dialogue and confrontation and challenge those words, because I very much want to avoid the conflict, just like the Siddhs, right? And this is a reality for many of us. We hear our own family members and friends say these words, but because we want to be amicable or bas matha nahi marna chaਹੁੰਦੇ, right? We don't want to hold ourselves and those around us accountable to our own beliefs and our own principles. It's fine if they say this because I don't believe in it. Why does it matter to me? That's their issue, their problem. But if I don't do the work of looking for that oneness within them and those they're hurting with their words, othering becomes such a natural outcome of this, right? Hate is just another example for when we see together. When we separate someone so much from Ikonkar that we're truly unable to see the creator and creation as one. And so in Party 24, Guru Nanak tells us, how can we use this virtue of compassion, of daya, then to truly connect with each other while having dialogue and to be able to see creator and creation as one? The one who dies while living, meaning the one who kills their ego, is compassionate for all within. Nanak, that person gets honor, who recognizes the self in creation. So the ego doesn't give us space for compassion because we don't actually feel the presence of Ikonkar in all the individuals, especially the ones we disagree with, right? If someone says women can't do this or that, I subconsciously categorize them as another because I disagree with those words, right? And those beliefs. But since the work hasn't gone into killing this ego, into this othering, it becomes so prominent in our thoughts and our dialogues. And it shows up when I don't respond to protect the sanctity of those who I might not even know as well as my family and my friends. And in that moment, I stop honoring that connection to Ikonkar and all. And Guru Sahib says, that's what's dishonorable, right? Clearly stated here, very specific, that only that person gets praised, is truly honored, one who's actually able to feel and see the presence of Ikonkar in all of creation. Even while I'm disagreeing with another person's belief, let me always speak in a way that never causes us to lose that reverence in Ikonkar. And this is my conjecturing of this line, that let me never forget and ingrain this within my subconscious so that when I respond, it's always while recognizing the self within creation, right? And so the societal beliefs that are also ingrained in me and those around me, whether it's racism, casteism, sexism, or any other isms that create that othering, those are unlearned, and we relearn that while having dialogue, it's that voice of compassion, not of ego or othering, that should enter the space and change the way we have dialogue. And so when we have that compassion, let's jump into then, where's that love coming from? What are the terms that we propose when we're showing that compassion? When during the pandemic, right, the Black Lives Matter movement was again surging, I noticed the first response of many Sikhs was, hey, they didn't show up for us during X, Y, or Z. So why should we as a community show up for them? I never saw them at any of our 1984 rallies or when we were protesting for the farmers. And out of those who did show up for the BLM movement, like me, it was a one-time event where I came, right? I nodded my head to the words of the speakers. I took a picture for proof. And then I went home to have dinner, right? And I told myself, hey, I've played my part, right? To end institutionalized racism. Go me for being woke. But now I hope to see them at my events, right? Now I hope to see them show up for me. And our solidarity then becomes a transaction, right? We actively think of our words and actions as an exchange and take the steps to make the situation a quid pro quo. The ego tells me like, I'll only show up for them, right? If they show up for me. And this showing up is at such a superficial level. We want them to be seen in these visibly public spaces. I've also heard my friends say that Sikhs are always supporting this group or that group, but why isn't anyone showing up for us? And that's the end of that chapter if they don't show up for us. But there's so many deeper layers to peel from this one train of thought. When Black people are being put down by our community members, we're not showing up for them there. When we undermine darker skinned members of our community because of the racism rooted within, we don't show up against that. Let's not forget that many of us have ridden the coattails of Black people for the advantages and privileges that we currently have, which we don't acknowledge. Instead, we continuously place these conditions on our love, on our support that we're giving out. So show up for me and I'll show up for you then, despite the deep pain that you're currently going through. The conditions have made it all about us, about me, instead of how can I help you? Where do you need us? And it's in those moments that I have to think back to this idea of effortless engagement, of Sahaj. In Party 41, Guru Nanak discusses how the Gurmukh, the Guru-oriented, is ideally able to effortlessly engage their conscious in their words and actions and clearly discriminate between right and wrong. And ideally, this individual knows what to do in any situation because of that insight that they have into the infinite wisdom. So they don't face any obstruction within their response. And ironically, it's the effort that they put in to actively make their love unconditional that's created this ideal state of effortless engagement of Sahaj. Right? The Guru-oriented can always be 100% sure of their responses because of that connection with Nam. They're absorbed within Nam, and so they're rising above this idea of transactions needing to occur for them to show up. This absorption in Nam lets their first response be filled with clarity. Like, what can I do to help? What's a possible solution here that we can come to together? And this happened when I watched that video of George Floyd. I truly heard that cry for help for the first time, right? And there was a change in that viewpoint, and the focus was shifted away from the self, away from this desire that an exchange needed to happen. And for the first time, I was engaging because I was attuning myself to this person I was seeing before me. And this didn't happen automatically, right? I had to genuinely make that effort to connect. The effortlessness is only brought about, again, when we actually make the effort to quiet down that voice of the ego by practicing Nam, so that the responses are truthful. And our sense of inner strength makes those responses not impulsive. And instead, our dialogue becomes one of unconditional love. And when we're able to make that a reflexive reaction, we can understand those viewpoints, the situations around us. And the responses of others don't affect me either, because I have that infinite patience guiding me and giving me clarity into how I'm responding, changing the way I'm having dialogue. So let's focus on some of these other principles as well to change our dialogue.
Yeah, thanks, Abinash. So as we talk, a little bit more about this idea of meaningful dialogue, we went a little bit into the Black Lives Matter movement. I think one of the things that sticks out to me the most is we have to become, or this idea of becoming more goal-oriented in our dialogue and focusing on the bigger picture and what truly matters. right? So if we take a look at how Guru Nanak interacted with the Siddhs, the Siddhs were trying to get him to answer all these like technical questions of, oh, who are you? What are your beliefs? What's your goal? Who do you follow? And trying to pick apart all these little distinctions. And while they're, focusing on these technicalities, Guru Nanak responds with this idea of, do we even need to focus on the technicalities? It's more important to focus on the bigger agenda. He says that he focuses on being a sacrifice to those who can show him how to connect with the truth, capital T. He sort of refocuses the discussion to what really matters to him at the present moment, which is that connection with the divine and operating from a place of love. And so again, making it relevant to today, we still see people getting caught up in these technicalities and small things here and there, and getting caught up in like tactics of discussion. And so how can we sort of adopt this more goal-oriented mindset that the Guru's laid out for us? And what does that actually mean to be goal-oriented? So next slide. So for example, we were talking about cats and dogs earlier. So this is actually kind of what I imagine, like two people who are arguing about whether cats are better, dogs are better. And kind of at least this is what they would look like. And, if it were me, and, I'm personally a dog person, as actually a lot of people here were, I would be trying to come up with, reasons why dogs are better. But, can I take a step back and realize that at the end of the day, regardless of whether someone likes cats or whether they like dogs, or, you could apply this more broadly to anything, the end goal here is the same. Next slide, please. So for this specific example, we all just want to get that happiness from an animal companion that we care about. So why even get so caught up in these technicalities when the goal here is clear? In fact, if I was in the situation and I actually, take the time to listen and be open, I may even leave with, who knows, a newfound respect for cats that I didn't have before. Next slide. So, there's so many examples we can go through. Different families will have different ideas for protocols in their house for their like home gurdwara, or how to do their nitnem, what kind of ardas they do. And everyone can get into these technicalities, but the goal is the same at the end of the day, right? It's about remembering Vaheguru in our daily lives. Instead of otherizing people, it's operating from a place of love and oneness. This idea of oneness comes up so much. And like, how can we sort of realize all that and use that as our foundation for moving forward together towards this common goal? And once we sort of think about it from that perspective, we start to focus a little bit more on this common, whether we have a common why, even though we may have different whats and different hows. And, it's okay to have those different whats and hows, as long as we can sort of focus in on that why. And, in dialogue, people will always try to pick apart these technicalities or use these different tactics of like questioning or whatever. But if we sort of shift our mindset to how Guru Nanak had set up for us with this clear goal, we become a little bit, in practice, more solution oriented, not focused on winning, not being egocentric. And we find this purpose and no longer get swayed. Next slide, please.
Diveesh, can I just make a quick point on that?
Yeah, of course.
I think this is what I love the point you made there about being principle oriented. And when you focus on this, it actually allows for and encourages a diversity perspective. Because if you can find a sense of shared purpose, shared values, then you can say, well, if that's what we're trying to get to, we can come up with a whole variety of ways of getting there. And there may be different ideas and different applications, different spaces, but it actually creates a common platform understanding that actually allows for different perspectives. So this is Guru Nanak saying, Guru Nanak in the caves with the yogis, not disagreeing with the fundamentals, that you're working towards something, I'm working towards something, but we have a different point of view on how to get there. And I think, I was thinking gun control, you mentioned it. Gun control, what do we all, somebody may say, I want every gun in the world. I mean, none, but what do we all want? We all want a safe community. We all want a place where my kids can go play on the street, where I can walk around town and not feel that I'm under threat. Now, how we get there is going to be different views, and we can talk about that. But if we can actually establish some foundation on which to have the conversation,
Right.
that's what this is speaking about. And that you're never going to get to on tactics, but on some principle, you can find that there. So I just want to second that point.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Thanks, Kulvir Singh. Yeah, it really is all about focusing on that shared goal. And if you can kind of get there, that's where we can sort of build and move forward. Otherwise, we kind of just get stuck, Yeah, at least in my experience, that's been the case. Yeah, cool. So again, this idea of, how can we get to that shared understanding, and how we can honestly just operate in love. This idea of meeting people where they're at or meeting people halfway is big in this idea of conversation. We saw that Guru Nanak was doing that too. He used the language of the Siddhs when he was trying to engage with them. The Siddhs claimed to be true yogis, for example, and Guru Nanak said, "My yoga is operating in love." Yogis said that they wear earrings and other adornments because that's just the protocol they follow, and it's critical attire for what a yogi, like for yogis. But Guru Nanak, responds cleverly with this idea of, my earring is the idea of killing ego and possessiveness itself, which I thought was awesome. Master poet. But, when we switch our mindset to one operating from love, and instead of trying to otherize them, we can actually meet people halfway and engage on their level. So, just literally the other day, I was listening to this podcast called The Daily. And so one of the episodes was this doctor. He lives in this primarily rural white Republican community. And, a lot of the people in the community were hesitant to, take the COVID vaccine. And, one couple claimed that they didn't want to take the vaccine because they believed that aborted fetus tissue was used in the development process. And so as an educated doctor, this man, he had the facts, and I could imagine, maybe hearing these claims may have been difficult to hear. But, he sat patiently through all of it. He came at it from a non-judgmental angle. And I think the thing that stuck out to me the most was that he explained things in a way that people could relate to. He gave a straightforward explanation on how the vaccines were developed. He said how they didn't use aborted fetal tissue. Some people made religious arguments, but this doctor was heavily involved in that town's religious community. So he really focused on instead of how can I prove that I'm right, he focused on how can I make this person feel like I'm engaging with them and I want to meet them where they're at. I want to be at the level where they're at. And I think that's kind of the key to focus on. I think that's a very good example. And, he provided the information, he just met the people where they're at. And at the end of the day, right, even if we can't necessarily convince everyone, we can let them make their own decisions, and all we can sort of do is give our side of it, and meet the people where they're at. Next slide, please. So sort of wrapping up what we've been sort of talking about so far is, all we can really do is we continue to engage, connect to Nam, realize that there is divine in everyone, and realize that through this mindset, we can foster this idea of becoming more solution-oriented and meeting people where they're at. And, at the end of the day, this idea has been touched on. Just we're operating from a place of love. And that's, we can trace everything back to this idea of love. And that's what I personally really, really connect to. I don't know if Kulvir Singh or Abinash Kaur, you have any reflections on that or comments you want to make?
Excellent. Hopefully that was a good conversation. I always like it when everyone takes the last second. That means they're having good discussions there. hopefully you were able to not just talk about the topic, but actually talk about how to talk about the topic. Because each of these, when we were coming up with the scenarios, are juicy enough, conversations on each one. So hopefully you were able to pick one and go from there. So what I'm going to ask is ask one person for each of the groups to go. I had the group names, folks from the group. So just one person to share out for a minute or two, kind of what was the highlight, not blow for blow, but kind of what were the big kind of takeaways that came from the conversation that you think everyone in the room should hear about. So the first room was, Vineet Kaur, man, Vineet is the keener. So Vineet's going to go first from her group here. So Vineet, if you can unmute and let's hear from you.
Right. Hello, everyone. I'm Vineet the keener. So we actually talked about, the topic we were kind of discussing was around the female representation. And the reason was we were all from different corners of the world. And so we thought this was a very common theme in all our experiences. So I'll just talk about the last question, which was how, is there some point of commonality to meet the other person halfway? And we talked about how really understanding the context for why certain beliefs are propagated by either a certain individual, or we felt like a certain generation sometimes is really important. So using Socratic questioning that we did on day 3, to understand that what are some of their core beliefs that they're afraid are going to be violated in, if it's a female sitting on tabia or doing seva, and helping them understand that our values are aligned in the way that we also want to make sure that there's utmost respect. And that Maryada is being followed, because Maryada is coming from the fact that the protocol to ensure that of how to serve and what service could be like, but really helping also then build through that Socratic questioning for ourselves to understand where have been certain, where is culture playing a role into this? So is there a patriarchy versus Sikhi themes playing out? Is there a cultural context in history versus modernity in Maryada playing in a role in that? Is there a fixed, rigid mentality that Maryada has to be fixed, or can it be an evolving rahat as we migrate into different parts of the world? So playing around those themes, helping establish that we have shared values and we have shared interests, different positions, and therefore bringing those positions together so that we can have one position as a community, but leaving it with a dialogue. And one of the challenge we saw coming forth is defensiveness in our own self, but also in the person that we're talking, because these topics are so charged that the moment you even ask the question of, oh, can you tell me why? It's not met with open-heartedness, but rather like, oh, you're a troublemaker here asking questions. And so really like stepping into that scenario with true open heart rather than with the intention to shake things up.
Wonderfully said. Thank you. Thank you, Vineet. Anyone else from the group want to chime in or conversation? On this one, Gurmukh, just I see your hand. I think you're in a different group. So we'll get to any comments or questions on this one from Gurmukh. Two things that I really liked about what you said there, Vineet. I think this sense of, I've heard this often said, is that you can be empathetic to the other person without actually agreeing to what they say. So in this situation, you may have a visceral that what they're doing or how they're what may be completely the opposite. But you can still have a real sense of understanding and putting yourself in their shoes of why are they feeling what they're feeling. And one of the hardest ways, but the best ways to do that is actually to be able to play back. And we all know this is stuff we learn in active listening kind of classes, is saying, so what I'm hearing is this, it seems this, that kind of language that for you, this is really important, or it's a question of this, or you, the challenge you're having is this. If you can actually start saying into that, that shows two things. One is it actually shows you're able to separate your emotions from the underlying conversation or the dialogue of the issues that are there. But more importantly, what's the first thing that anyone wants to feel in a dialogue is that they've been heard. And we never often give people that acknowledgement. But when somebody says, that's right, that's what I believe. Yep. So you can say, what I'm hearing from you, Diveesh, is that on this, it's really important for you that the reverence or sanctity or respect, that this is honored there. And this is one of the issues and you're like, yeah, that's right. Then you now have something to move. But if Diveesh feels I haven't even heard where he's come from and I don't get it, how are we ever going to move beyond that? He's going to keep trying to make the same points again and again. That's no, Kulvir, you're not getting it. Let me say it to you. Let me say it to you slower and louder so that you might get it. So I think there we need a couple really around kind of. So excellent. Thank you. And your group members love what you said. So excellent. Let's, any other thoughts from anyone on this topic, on this piece in the chat? Okay, excellent. I see Karndeep, you had your hand up. Are you the representative for your group?
I guess I am. We didn't really discuss that.
You've been voluntold, so run with it.
Perfect. So I won't go into the issues. So basically what I want to highlight is how do we talk about these issues by bringing parallels from our own history. Like I look at these issues and I see a lot of similarities in what the Sikh community has gone through in the last hundreds of years. History has not been, easy for Sikhs. We have been discriminated against by, other people. And we see a lot of those problems kind of erupting nowadays, especially with the BLM movement or LGBTQ community. So to have an effective conversation with somebody, who's hesitant about talking about or can't understand, why are they doing all this? I feel like we should present or try to connect our own problems that we as a community have gone through in the past. Sikhs were not allowed to go to Harmandir Sahib at some point, at one point in history. Sikhs were not allowed to, raise arms. Sikhs were martyred mercilessly. And we have gone through a lot of these problems. These are probably the easiest times for Sikhs nowadays, and we probably feel like we're most disconnected at this point in our history as well. But to be able to understand, why these things are happening to other people nowadays, I think we need to reflect on ourselves. Like, hey, we have been through this. How did we deal with it, and how did we come out of the other end? So that's the main thing I wanted to.
Yeah, thank you. Others from that group want to chime in? Anything else that Alvin, Dave, Gagandeep, or Manpreet want to share?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Manpreet. Yeah.
So one of the things that has always intrigued me, and this could be my ignorance as well, like one thing that I want to ask, if anybody in the group already knows, is that when Guru Nanak Dev Ji went to Sidh, like why did he go there? And when that conversation was going on, what was the reason that Guru Nanak Dev Ji felt he could have that conversation? And what was the impact of that conversation on Siddhs? And of course, Guru Nanak Dev Ji, which I don't know, but I'm like connecting his life, maybe he might have picked up some learnings and then applied in his own life. And then, yes, that was one aspect. And the other aspect was, at that point in time, like when our gurus were alive, there were so many issues going on. Our guru tackled issues first in their own homes. But when it came to society, were they selective, or were they like trying to tackle every issue? Because at every point in time in our lives, like just to apply, if we have to learn from them, we have so many issues going on. how do we prioritize? Like whatever things were there on the sheet, there were so many issues. Is it a conversation? Like whenever we're having a dialogue, it takes an energy out of us. Is it wise for Sikhs or people who want to become Gurmukhs to prioritize, or they start having a dialogue on each and everything? Like, yeah, those were those questions that.
Great questions to ponder. I have no answers. I think the questions that you have asked around, well, why did the Guru Sahib go? Why did the Guru Sahib, engage? What did they go to get out of it? What did the Sidhs get out of it? I think those are ones that are either left for historians or for us to ponder. I think more importantly is, what did we get out of it? Because the Guru Sahib did go, and Guru Sahib did have the conversation. And Guru Sahib did then actually put pen to paper and record the conversation, not just his perspectives, but the actual questions that were raised. So I think for us, the question is what are we taking away from this? And where do we then choose to apply this thinking and this mindset? I think it's a challenge for anybody who tries to be an activist, is where do you make a difference? We've all been at a point, I think anybody who's tried any kind of community activism, you try to, you try to be everywhere for everyone all the time. And you quickly exhaust yourself, burn yourself out, and you actually don't make much of a difference. So I think the question is, these are the issues, where the gurus in history, the living gurus, they chose to take stands on very specific issues of the time that were relevant in that moment. I think for us, the principle is being relevant and saying, what are the issues where I have the ability to make a difference, where I have maybe a point of view, an inspiration, the tools, the capacity, the privilege to do something about it. And it could be on a global stage at the United Nations, or running for a global office, or applying, being able to mobilize billions of dollars of resources to tackle something at a global level. Or it could be helping the Kaur at the Gurdwara, who's facing challenges there, or the local community, whatever that is. I think the beautiful thing is, if we have 30 million Sikhs, 25 million, 30 million Sikhs who are Guru inspired, that they actually can bring this thinking to 7 billion people. Everyone does the thing that they're most passionate about, the thing where they can make the biggest difference. We'll change the world. We'll transform the reality. So this is not a question of me doing everything. Who am I, one person? It's a question of where can I make a difference, but collectively, more importantly, how can I be the bodice that we talked about this morning? How can I mobilize others to make a difference out there? And to the point that Gandhi had it, tapping into our own history, our own journey is so important. And this is not about one-upping somebody else's pain. This is not about going to the indigenous community and say, can you believe what the British did to you? Let me tell you what the British, that's not what this is about, right? In Canada, but this is about saying, we know what the impact, we're just starting to comprehend the impact that colonialism has had on the Sikh, not just history, but Sikh psyche to this day. And we also know that the indigenous community is going through the Aboriginal community is going through something similar. So that is a point of empathy. That is a point of common pain. So this is not about sharing and one-upping their pain with my pain, but going back to our community and with Indigenous, I can go back to our community often here in Canada and say, Jo kuch, ਸਾਡੇ ਨਾਲ ਹੋਇਆ ਸਿੱਖਾਂ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ, that's what's happened to them. So let's deal with them with ਹਮਦਰਦੀ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ, ਨਿਮਰਤਾ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ, ਪਿਆਰ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ. Let's see their pain reflected through the pain that we've gone through as well. So it actually is a great around how we can find that point of common. And I've seen this done. Abinash was talking about it, Black Lives Matter and these debates that we show up there and we say, well, they didn't come to ours. But the other thing we do is we go to their events and start explaining our pain to them. We start talking about 1984 at their events. Well, there's a time and place for sure, but that's not why we're there. We're there to be there with them and supporting them in their moment of need. And when there's a reciprocation and in the dialogue, of course, we can share our common journeys. But I think there's a real kind of a nuance we need to apply to these as well. So thoughts, Abinash, Diveesh, on any of this? And others chime in on the chat, please.
Yeah, I mean, when I was younger, that first question you had about why did Guru Nanak Sahib go to the caves? Why did he have this conversation? there was this, ideology that was instilled within me that, he's trying to preach, he's trying to show his way to the world, right? But at the heart of it, it was to establish that common why, to spread that message of Ikonkar, right? And it wasn't done to preach per se, right? But it's when you're liberated, as we were discussing before, that again, coming back to the idea of the paras, right? When that overflows from you, and everything else around you also gets touched with that energy, right? That also becomes changed and influenced by you. So I think, like, we can't go to every situation. Like, we can't every single protest out there. But what we can do is ask again, yes, what are my skill sets that I can give in the situations occurring around me, right? Very often, like, I think of just donating financially to situations, right? Which is okay. But where can I also use my skill sets? Like, how can I show up in these different forms, these different ways, with whatever gift that I have to give, right? Whatever dawn that I want to give back to the world. So it's a very question that you're asking, and I definitely don't know the answer either. But I think that we definitely have to pick and choose, like, where we want to put our energy in, where we can make the most impact, so that we're creating that change, creating those policies around us.
Well said. Well said. Sure. Diveesh, anything, or we can move on to the other group?
Yeah, just a quick thing. I mean, at risk of maybe overly simplifying it a little bit, like this question of, how do we prioritize things, what do we focus our energies on? I feel like going back to this idea of being a little bit like principle oriented, right? Kulvir Singh mentioned this idea of where can I make the biggest impact, right? And I think for me personally, like, I would probably use that as a way to maybe just figure out where to devote my efforts. And, obviously I'm not going to say, you have to prioritize Black Lives Matter over like the LGBTQ movement. Like, that's up to you to decide, right? But, this idea of what do I feel most passionate about? Where can I make the biggest impact? If we use that as the starting point, then I think the prioritizing aspect starts to become maybe a little bit easier. At least that's for me personally.
Agreed. I always, we love Gurmukh Singh at Sikhi, but one of the lines of his is, I am the Guru's reed flute, and I'm also the Guru's sword. So when it comes time to sing the praises and connect with the virtues of Guru, I do that. And when it's time to be the sword of the Guru to defend and fight for the rights of others and be an activist, that's me as well. So a lot of this is for us to perhaps prioritize, but if a lot of it is accepting what comes our way, accepting the hukum, accepting living in the flow, and that, Vaiguru's putting me in the place and time and answering the Guru's call. That's, being at the ready, so that if it is there to support a particular group or Panth ki jeet or Sabad-Infinite, is it for, is it for the Deg or the Teg? What are we fighting for? Well, sometimes we don't get to choose sometimes. Sometimes those, often if you ask many of the activists, they'll say the issues found them, the dialogues found them. And so this is not about becoming an expert in one thing. It's actually opening yourself up to the world and saying, where is it that I am, that I am trending towards, and where can I make that difference there? So excellent. Let's hear from the last group before we move on. Who's going to speak from that last group there? I think this is the core all stars here. I think I see Bulminder. Oh, Gurpreet, go ahead. Gurpreet.
Hi. So we were all cause, and you would think we would choose the question about the cause, but we didn't. We chose the LGBTQ question. 3 of us were from Malaysia, and there was one girl from West. Pranati was from US. And the interesting thing was that the issues regarding LGBTQ was very similar regardless of our locations, that it wasn't a topic that could be discussed not an easy topic to be discussed with your parents, in the society, with your peers. And so that was interesting to note that it's not a regional or selective thing, it's a world issue. The first question was, let me just pull that up. What controversies surround this topic within the community? At first, it was a bit difficult to imagine having this conversation with a parent figure, like an uncle and auntie. And so we decided to switch the perspective a bit and imagine talking to a friend about it. And that got the conversation flowing a little better. I think a lot of people, we look at it as they don't support LGBTQ, but we have to dig in deeper and see where are they from. Sometimes it could be denial, it could be ignorance of the topic of what LGBTQ is all about, and because there's so much of talk about it in the media that a lot of people may just resent it just purely because it's too famous a topic and you don't want to dive deeper, but actually they're just ignorant, they don't know the topic. There's a lack of knowledge, and so when you look at them in that way, that might help to tone it down a little bit. And then what inspiration can we draw? I think for me and for the group is that, like what you all had discussed earlier, that you shouldn't look at it as winning a battle. When you go in wanting to win a battle, you then equip yourself with all your points and you're having all these guns and ready when they say something, you're ready to just bam them down. So when you go in with that energy, the other person reads off your energy and they will respond the same way, which wasn't how Guru Nanak did it in those days, where he accepted them for, yes, that's the way you are and I'm just doing it my way, and he did not say that you are wrong and I'm right. And it was understanding each other's where each other's point of view came from. And I think that is important, because at the end of the day, try to explain where the commonality with the other person could be. Try and get them to understand that even if you don't agree with that point, it's okay if you don't agree with that point, but if it's not going to affect your day-to-day life, if it doesn't affect you as a person, why should you be so passionate about being against that topic? Why is their choice affecting your choice? And why are you allowing their, that kind of negativity to come in you when they actually have got nothing against you? You shouldn't have anything against them and agree with what they are doing, but everybody has their own life and let them live their own life, because at the end of the day, we're all seeking, a relationship with the divine, companionship. There's a lot of similar things that we are seeking, but it's just our ways are very different. So yeah. That's kind of what I have to say.
No, that's well said. I think on these issues, things move. Sometimes they seem to move very slowly, but they also move very quickly. On LGBT issues is an example of where it is amazing. All of us, regardless of your age, just think of what the conversation was like around the LGBT community and acceptance of that just a decade, 2 decades, and then never mind, 20, 30, 40 years ago. And I think the conversation moves very quickly in our community. The point to remember is that in dialogue, it's not a transactional or dialogue, and with moving people and changing it around, this is not one conversation I'm going to change somebody's mind. And like you said, it isn't about changing people's minds. If you can't actually change anybody's minds. If you're a parent, you know that. I can't get my kids to do anything. All I can do is create the environment in which they themselves want to change. So I think this is creating that space for that and having the space. And I would say one of the greatest acts of humility is the ability to change your own mind, and giving people the space to do that. And sometimes we don't give people space to change their own minds. We're so on them and so defensive, and they're on their heels that they have to keep fighting. So the thought is how do we give people space? And then in that, let's not forget, let's not have our own hubris. We give ourselves space to change our own minds. And on LGBT issues I can be the first to admit of how much I've come on that issue over the course of my lifetime. And just the way I was raised and the way I'm thinking about it now and how much more. And when it comes around, we are all moving too. So let's not forget, these aren't two fixed positions. We're all moving targets in these conversations and these dialogues here, because the Guru is perfection. The Guru is there to change the Siddhs, and because the Guru was perfectly connected to Ekonkar, but we're mere mortals. We're still trying to connect as we're trying to bring others. So we're transforming ourselves as we're trying to transform the world there. So thank you for that. Thank you for that group. And I realized that we had one other group left, so I want to give them time as well. So that I think was Jujar, Manath, Rupinder, who's Hargobind? Yeah, over to you, Hargobind.
Anji, so we decided to opt for scenario number 2, when a kaur plays a more active role in Gurdwara. And as to the first question in regards to the controversies that surround this topic, some of the ideas that were brought forward, I think Jujar mentioned that gender knowledge that we face. We brought up the nature of the patriarchal society, which is very much, and it's not necessarily a Sikh issue, it's also an Indian issue, I would say. There was a question brought up from Rupinder about judgmental tendencies as well. I think we see that in our Gurdwaras more than anywhere else, actually. And I believe Manath also highlighted tradition as one issue, you know, over the centuries, over the years, that we've seen generally men play certain roles. And so suddenly when the shoe's on the other foot, it becomes an issue for some people in the community. And as regards to question 2, what inspiration can we draw from Sidh Gosti? The first thing that was brought up was the idea that the idea of finding common ground. I believe this was from Manath. And it's so clear that Guru Sahib establishes that in Sidh Gosti, because I think it was brought up in one of the slides, common objective. And it's creating a healthy environment for dialogue and conversation. And there was also a mention of, Rupinder said this about starting with accepting the fact that everyone has a different understanding, to not go into the conversation with the end goal being that I'm going to change someone's mind, but sometimes it's just a matter of planting the seed. So should they encounter a similar scenario in the future, there's a possibility that it's going to harken back to this conversation that they had once upon a time, and it might help them see things in a different light. Because I think that's what Guru Nanak Dev Ji was trying to do with the Siddhs as well. Because to sit in front of such learned beings with the assumption that you were going to change their minds in conversation, I think would have been a little foolhardy. But I think Guru Sahib knew that all I need to do is to ask the right questions, put forward the right arguments, and if nothing else, it's going to leave the Siddhs thinking about what I said, you know. So we discussed that as well. And I think one of the things that I really loved about Sidh Gosti was the fact that Guru Sahib was giving respect to their stature and acknowledging their worth. Because sometimes when you want to have a conversation with someone, if you come across a little provocative or antagonistic, the other person immediately shuts down. There's a defense mechanism that kicks in, that you do not respect me, you do not respect the opinions that I stand for. And I did not see Guru Sahib do that at all. Like from the get-go, he's actually acknowledging that the Siddhs are filled with wisdom and they're already walking on the path, you know. So that in a way disarms the Siddhs a little bit. They're like, oh, okay, I guess we can have a conversation then, you know. So we really like that part of it.
Good.
As for question number 3, is there some point of commonality? So I think we all agreed on this, the idea of creating a comfortable environment for the both of us. I think that's something that's actually discussed in businesses today as well. You know, how to create the kind of environment that's open and just it just encourages discourse. So that was one. The other one was to pause, to listen, and to ask for their take or even their clarification. Because when one party is going to do too much of the talking, it really sounds like a lecture. So if there is this tendency to pause in between, just like how we see in Sidh Gosti, where there's a dialogue happening, you know, there's a little bit of the Siddhs, there's a little bit of Guru Nanak Sahib. So what that means is that both parties are inquisitive enough, interested enough in conversation to keep it going. And that was pretty important for us. And Jujar shared this, which I thought was pretty beautiful, to not draw inspiration from just one source. And I think this is important to understand, because sometimes when we're having a conversation about something, we tend to get so, we have this phrase, a tunnel vision, you know, where you just have this one thing at the back of your mind, one piece of evidence that you're trying to use to just discount everything else. But I remember he mentioned, if you refer to multiple sources at the same time, it puts forward the idea that it's not just you who's saying this, there are corroborators on the same idea as well. And I think that allows for the conversation to stay in the positive zone instead of get into a position where it's all about my opinions are being attacked, or I am choosing to attack your opinions with the intent of basically destroying you. So we quite liked that. And I think that's everything. Piario, if there's anything that I missed, please do. Thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you. That is actually a very good summary. And I think we should have Gurmukh to present this next time. So nothing to add from my end there. Abinash, Diveesh, anything before we move to close from across any of the groups that you heard that you want to share on?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it really, I mean, for me, it comes back to this, like, this idea of like, it's not that I'm trying to win. It's not that it's not me versus you, right? And I feel like that theme came up so much throughout people's reflections, and just how can we sort of, meet the other person where they're at, actually like listen to them, and, really shift our mindset over to one of like, just not, what's the word? Not such a device. So yeah, I mean, everyone had lovely reflections, and it was a great way to sort of wrap up the session.
Any comments from you?
Yeah, that idea about creating that comfortable space, I think, hits the nail on the head. We often go into the dialogue thinking that we're going to bring our ideas forward, and that's like the space that we want to be in because we're so comfortable with that. But opening ourselves to grow and be uncomfortable and having that serious talk about, where is our common purpose? Where is our shared ground? How can we actually come to a solution rather than continue escalating the situation? I think that's really important. Yeah.
Fantastic. Good. So as we move to wrap up here in the last couple of minutes, just want you to reflect on some of the questions we posed that you posted there earlier, and maybe you got some insight around that, this thing around slowing things down, taking a pause, maybe not speaking as fast as I usually do, and maybe a little bit of time for listening and reflection, and not everything in one conversation. I think there's something there, I think, around how to get better at facilitating conversation. Facilitating is a powerful word, right? You're actually making sure that there's a balance between the different parties, that you're working towards something. So how does that come into it? I think this thing around agreeing to disagree and when's a good stopping point. I hope you got some reflections on that as well, and how to actually be in the moment, how to be there and fully acknowledging the other person and where they're coming from, rather than, of course, trying to come up with the next comment and next argument or whatever that TKO blow is going to be that we often think about there. So hopefully there were some practical things that came out of it. So to wrap, this session and actually the overall program here, we hope over the course of this week, Sidh Gosti is one of these kind of the most epic bodies in the Guru Granth Sahib, one that many of us have heard about, but is one that I think I frankly found a bit intimidating to engage with. Just it's a longer body. There's so many levels there, and to even know about it, I got to know about the Siddhs, like the yogis and everything they have, so I can contrast it. But I hope over the course of this week you've been able to dive in and at least get that first level of understanding and appreciation. And some of the themes that we have here are really not just specific to Sidh Gosti, but larger themes that we explore at Sikhi all the time. And as Sikhs, this is what I think about often, is that how do I keep having that connection with Ek Onkar and using Nam as a way of relating to Ek Onkar and pulling that into every interaction. I'm going to go down now and spend time with my family and be on work calls and go out and stand in a long lineup for my coffee. How do I bring Ek Onkar into that? When I see the next person saying something that I don't agree with, how do I bring it there? How do I find this sense of sweet humility that isn't over for being firm, the firm backbone with the soft belly, right? That I can be in dialogue, I can show up in love, but still have a principled stance, that I can learn to bring the Guru's language into my day-to-day life. The real yoga, the real connection that I'm looking for on a spiritual and political level. How do I bring those? How do I bring spirituality into a political setting? And how do I bring activism into a spiritual setting? That's for us two sides of the same coin that we can never live without. And that turns into our Nam, our Dan, our Snan in our daily lives, and this aspiration of living in a Gurmukh as a being, but also Gurmukh as Guru-oriented, Guru-facing. We hope that you had some thoughts and reflections on that. And then at the end, we reflect on Guru, and it's so easy to be thinking of the Guru as the physical gurus, because the pictures, the paintings are all around us, and we refer to the 10 Nanaks. But the Shabd Guru that we have with us in the Guru Granth Sahib, how do we make that as our foundation? How do we go from reciting Barney or looking at it, glancing at it, to the Barney is what comes to our lips when we are in a situation, when we are going into dialogue, that Shabd is with us, that Barney is with us, that it actually is informing our worldview there. So these are the things that I hope each of you are spending time reflecting on. I think these are the things that brought me to Siddiq the first time I participated in it, and also are the things that we think about often at Sikhi. This is why we exist, is to help every individual find their connection to the Guru. We are not in any way responsible for connecting you to Sikhi and Gurbani, and we can't do that. That's Guru's Kirpa. That's the role that Guru Prasad plays. All we try to do is assemble the resources, the toolkit that you could take alongside that might be of some value as you go on this journey. I can speak personally that this is my Sikhi has been so tied into my connection with Sikhi, because this is where I get that inspiration. This is where I get the tools for my heart, my head, and my hands coming together. And I hope that this week has given you a glimpse of what Siddiq, the magic of Siddiq would be in a personal setting, even in where you are sitting in the world. It's amazing. Friends from Malaysia and all over the US, North America, all that have made time for this. Thank you for that. And I hope you continue to engage with Sikhi on many levels, on the webinars, on the tools. The Guru Granth Sahib project is changing the world. It is going to change how we are able to engage with the Guru Granth Sahib, and I hope you find time for all those things there. Special thank you to my friends Abinash Kaur and Diveesh Singh for their tireless effort in putting this together. This was a labor of love, and they put their passion into it while they were traveling and working and doing everything else with that. So thank you to them. And finally, thank you to Jasdeep Kaur in the background, making sure that all the technical side was taken into account, that nothing slipped through the cracks there. She's a rock star when it comes. She's the Zoom master for us. Thank you for that. And then finally to Anarchy for being the backbone of Siddiq and just making everything come together, all the different people are there. And she's been a pleasure to work with in my years with her. And then I think just Siddiq wouldn't, this week would not have happened without her hard work. So thank you to them. And with that, I'll pass it over to Anarchy to wrap us up.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that, Kulvir Singh, Diveesh Singh, and Abinash Kaur for that incredible presentation that's got us all thinking. And as everyone was speaking, I was thinking, because as it's been mentioned by many of our Canadian presenters here, that Indigenous principles and rights are at the forefront of everything we do here in Canada. And it reminded me of a principle that we and I think it really applies here, and that is that learning takes patience and time. And definitely, you have been loaded with information, lots to think about, but please remember just take time with it. It does take a long time. I know the first time I went to Siddiq, it took me a couple of, even a year, maybe more to kind of go, oh yeah, that's right. We talked about that at Siddiq, and kind of really internalize what it was. So you get everything all at you at once, but it definitely, you will see this come up over the next couple of weeks, couple of months, even in some cases, maybe even a year from now, you sit and you look at your notes or the recording of this and you think, yes, that I remember that, and now I'm seeing this applied. And so take that time and so just know that this takes a lot of courage to come to something like this, to Siddiq, to learn, to dig into yourself. And so the thank you that I can add to this is to all of you for attending, for taking your time to be with us and to learn and grow with us, but also a thank you to you personally for taking that risk and delving into yourselves here. So along with that, I'd like to thank Jasdeep Kaur as well, for all of her hard work in the back, the facilitators for all of the work that they've been doing for the last couple of months. And as you've seen, many of our are Civic alumni, so who knows, maybe one day this could be you as well. We would love to have you continue to be a part of our Civic community, and we look forward to having you join us for other events. And hopefully next year we'll actually have Civic in person, and so we can get to meet in person as well. So with that, we look forward to joining you, or we look forward to you joining us at our next event. Please keep an eye on your social media and your emails, and we will be in touch shortly. Thank you so much for joining us today. Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh.